Hi, and welcome back to SDRTK. Today we're going to take a look at two popular microphones for both project and studio use. We have the Shure SM57 dynamic microphone and the AKG P170 small diaphragm condenser microphone. So let's check them out head to head. And so for this comparison, we'll start out with unprocessed audio for dialogue. We'll use three different preamps. We'll use the Focusrite Scarlett 8i6, the ART voice channel, which is a tube preamp, and we'll use the DBX286S. Again, those will be without processing. In fact, all the audio in this video review will be without processing, except for the process demonstration. After we compare them on dialogue, we'll move them over to the guitar and bass amps. And again, we'll do some recordings and compare both of these microphones without any processing. Then I'll take a look at some physical characteristics, handling noise, plosives, working distance, and finally we'll do a processed comparison of these two. So let's get to it. And so to begin the dialogue comparison, right now you're listening to me on the Shure SM57, and this is directly into the Focusrite Scarlett 8i6, and I have the gain set at 3 o'clock. No mic boosters or anything here. I just wanted this microphone to microphone without any added advantage one way or the other. And so this is what it sounds like on the SM57. Now we'll go ahead and see what we get out of the P170. And now I have the AKG P170 again connected directly into the Focusrite Scarlett 8i6. Here I have the gain set at about 11 o'clock and we're using 48 volts of phantom power. This of course is a small diaphragm condenser microphone, so it needs that phantom power to create sound. And this is the tone that you get. And now that you've been listening to me on both microphones, can you tell which one I'm speaking on now? Is it the Shure SM57 or the AKG P170? Check the top corner to find out. And now I have the SM57 connected directly into the ART voice channel. This is a tube preamp, and what I've done is use my patch bay to route the preamp output directly back into one of the inputs, the line ins on the Scarlett 8i6. So I bypassed all the processing on the channel strip. And so this is just to give you an idea of what the SM57 sounds like through a tube preamp. You can see I have the gain set at about 2 o'clock and no mic booster, nothing going on here. So this is what the 57 sounds like through a tube preamp. Now we'll go ahead and throw the P170 on the same channel strip. And now I have the AKG P170 again connected directly into the ART voice channel, a tube preamplifier. You can see I have the gain set at about 1030 with phantom power. And once again here, I've taken my patch bay and I've routed the preamp from the ART back into the Scarlett 8i6 into a line in. So we're bypassing all of the processing on the ART voice channel. And I wanted to give you an idea of what the difference in sound on the tube preamp is between the SM57 and the P170. Now let's move on to the DBX286. And now I have the SM57 connected directly into the DBX286S. Again, I've used my patch bay to route the preamp output directly into one of the line ins on the Scarlett 8i6. So we're not hearing any processing from the DBX286S. So this is the SM57 through a DBX preamp, just to give you an idea of what that would sound like. Now I'll go ahead and throw the P170 on the DBX and we'll see what the difference is. And finally, I've connected the AKG P170 directly into the DBX286. You can see I have the gain set at about noon with phantom power. Once again, I've used the patch bay to route the audio from the preamp on the DBX directly back to the 8i6, one of the line ins. So we're bypassing all of that processing on the channel strip. A preamp only here. And again, so you can get a comparison between the SM57 and the P170 through a DBX preamp. And you can see if there's any difference in the sound, if you prefer one over the other. Mainly it's to give you an idea of the tone and the characteristics of these microphones, as opposed to saying one is better than the other. I think it all comes down to applications. But nonetheless, that's where we are with the DBX286S. With the P170, no processing, preamp only. And now that you've had a chance to compare the sound of the P170 versus the SM57 for dialogue, using the 8i6 preamps, the ART tube preamp, as well as the DBX preamp, I'll go ahead and mic up the guitar and bass cabinets here, and we'll compare the sound we can get out of these two microphones. For this comparison, we'll have both mics connected directly into the Scarlett 8i6 without any processing. And looking at the frequency analysis of the rock guitar recording, we can see that both the AKG P170 and the Shure SM57 patterns look very similar. One thing that's notable is that the 57 does have a little more sensitivity, particularly in the mid-low range. And the P170 actually is a little bit thinner all the way across the range, especially mid to highs. We see that the 57 has kind of a denser pack of frequencies in a lot of areas. Again, this is splitting hairs. They're very similar, but just something to know here. One of the advantages of having that little bit thinner sound, if you will, with the 170 is sometimes it's easier to get it to fit well in a mix. Because if we have, all of the recordings are very dense, very full, then there isn't a whole lot of room left in terms of the mix itself. So that's one consideration here. But overall, I would have to say both microphones very, very close. And, that's to be expected when you have, two microphones that are of the quality that they are and widely used in a professional studio environment. And looking at the blues recording, we can see again that the 57 and the 170 both have very similar profiles here to the frequency analysis. You can see that the 57 actually appears to pick up a little more in sort of the higher range. And again, that's due to the thickness of the sound. It's picking up a little more density across all of the frequencies. And so we're seeing a bit more of that. The 170 has a little bit thinner sound. And also kind of in the mid-low area, we can see that the 57 tends to fill that in a little bit more. So again, both of these microphones would be very good on blues guitar, and the fact that there's such a lot of similarity again in these frequency curves just really shows again a lot why these two microphones are both widely used and highly regarded for recordings that make it easy to mix. And I thought it would be very interesting to include recordings of the bass amp with both of these microphones. Certainly, there are other choices, and neither one is necessarily the first choice when it comes to recording a bass cabinet, and certainly not the P170. But as we can see here, the reproduction, again, is quite faithful between the two. The 57 does pick up a little more density in those lower range frequencies, of course, as to be expected. But the P170 could be a little more open, and that could be an advantage, actually, when recording bass, leaving a little more room in those lower frequencies to help with the bass guitar and some of the drum sounds in there as well. So there could be some advantages, but once again here, I think, if you had to go with either one of these, it would certainly do the job for you for bass recordings. We're kind of splitting hairs between the two, but If you can have both in the mic locker, the 170 will give you a little more room in the mix. The 57 will give you a little fuller, warmer sound. And now we'll do our processed audio demonstration here. We're starting out in the box, and so you'll see that I have two instances of Neutron 3 on the screen. The one on the left is the one that the SM57 is being processed through, and the one on the right has the P170. And you can see for the SM57, I have a little bit of a boost in the low end. I've removed just a couple of frequencies, and in my room I know can be a bit problematic here. And I've added a slight presence boost and air boost to try to give the 57 a little bit more life. It does tend to be a little darker microphone. And we have a little bit of compression going on here. As you can see, very, very minor, not much happening at all there. And Sonic Exciter, I've added again just a little bit to help out a bit with the transient response on the 57. Now taking a look at the P170, I've actually gone ahead and added a little bit, this is a little more boost in the low end. And I've also cut, again, a few of those problematic frequencies out in my space. I haven't gone ahead and added really any kind of a presence boost here. The de-esser is pretty much where it is with the 57. Not a big change there. And again, I haven't added any extra air in here because the P170 definitely can stand on its own. And compression, again, the same thing. Very little going on. If the odd transient gets dropped down, I tried not to overdo anything with this. And again, a little bit on the exciter just to kind of even those up between the two microphones. And so we have the SM57 on the left, the P170 on the right. In the box compression using isotope Neutron 3. You could do this with a lot of different types of plugins. I've just happened to use Neutron 3 for this demonstration. But hopefully this gives you an idea of in-the-box sound for dialogue, again, with the 57 versus the 170. And now I'll do our processing comparison with the SM57 versus the P170, this time on the ART voice channel. So starting out here, I have the SM57 connected into the ART, gain set at about 2 o'clock here. I've applied some compression as well as a de-esser. I've set up the equalizer so it's pre-comp, so it's happening before the compressor here. And I've gone ahead and boosted some bass, a little bit of a cut in that sort of 200 to 300 hertz range, a little bit of a cut again up in that sort of mid-presence with some boost in the air zone. And so this is kind of the sound you get with the SM57 processed through the ART voice channel. Again, a tube preamplifier. Now I'll go ahead and I'll throw the P170 on here so you can compare. And now I have the AKG P170 connected up to the ART voice channel. You can see I have the gain set at about 1030 here. I've applied phantom power for this condenser microphone. We do have compression as well as a de-essing going on here. Once again, I've set up the EQ to be pre-comp, so it's happening before the compressor. Little bit of boost happening in the bass here, again with a little bit of cut around that 200-300 hertz area. Mid's kind of about flat, mid-presence where I have it, and I've also reduced the air a bit because this microphone has a little more presence, a little bit more air than the 57 to begin with. And so this is the AKG P170 connected into the ART voice channel tube preamp with processing through the channel strip. It can give you an idea. You can compare it against the SM57 and see what the tone, what the quality of the two microphones' tone is like when we apply a little bit of processing to them. And now we'll look at what these microphones sound like with processing on the DBX286S. So starting out here, of course, again on the SM57, I have this running into the DBX286S. I have some compression applied here. You can see it's acting. Also, I've applied a de-esser just to try and tame that down a little bit. We've got low frequency and high frequency enhancement going on here, as well as the expander. So just a few adjustments to add a little bit of body to the sound with this microphone and disable some of the S's, some of the sibilance that's happening to give a little bit cleaner sound. Now I'll go ahead and throw the P170 onto the DBX286S and we can compare. Okay, and now I've gone ahead and connected the AKG P170 directly into the DBX286S. As you can see here, I've reduced the gain to about 11 o'clock. There's 48 volts phantom power because, of course, this is a condenser microphone. I've added some compression as well as de-essing. Added a little more in terms of the low frequency detail on the enhancer. I've left the high frequency about the same as the 57 was using. And, of course, a little bit of expansion on here as well. And so this is a very basic processing setup with the DBX286S for the AKG P170, just so you can get an idea again of what you can get out of processing on a basic channel strip like the DBX with both the SM57 and the P170. And so now that we've gone through processing examples in the box, as well as using the ART voice channel and the DBX286S channel strips, we'll go ahead and do some physical tests on these microphones. I've moved them both back over to the Scarlett 8i6, again with no processing for all the physical tests. So let's start the physical tests with a look at working distance and proximity. So right now I'm at about 6 inches away on both microphones. You're hearing me on the SM57. As I get closer to it, we'll just look at the proximity effect, and certainly this microphone does have some proximity effect showing here. So as I back away, that's what we get. Now we'll move over, and you're listening to me on the P170. Again, I'm about 6 inches away. Now I'll move over closer to the microphone. This microphone I know is very susceptible to plosives, so I'm going to be very careful to talk across the microphone. But this is what the proximity is like on the P170. And so each of these microphones does experience proximity effect. You have to be aware of that. But of course, you wouldn't want a close mic either of these, certainly not without a pop filter, because they're going to create a lot of plosives, and we'll get to that shortly. But let's also take a look here again at working distance. Again, this is about 6 inches away. I'm just going to back off to about a foot. Now I'm at about a foot away from both microphones, and this is the sound. So again, you're hearing me through the SM57. And so at about a foot away, this is what it sounds like. And now I've switched over to the P170. And again, I'm at about a foot away from the microphone. And this is the sound you get. The P170, of course, being a condenser microphone, is going to be more sensitive than the SM57. And so it'll tend to have a little more signal at this kind of distance. I'm not going to back up any further because, both of these microphones are really intended to be placed in a reasonable distance from the source. I mean, you can mic the P170 at a far distance away, but really you're just going to introduce a lot of room noise. So unless that's what you're wanting to do, maybe you're using it as a room mic or overheads on a drum kit or something like that, you want to get more of that flavor of the room, you would do that. But for a head-to-head comparison, that's not really a use case for both of these microphones, in my opinion. So we'll leave it here at a foot away. Now we'll go ahead and check out the plosive performance on each of these microphones. So we'll start out on the 57. People, because. And yeah, I mean, definitely getting plosives there. I can hear it in my monitoring. Let's go over to the P170. People, because. And you definitely hear it there too. I mean, neither of these microphones is intended for a close mic situation. Again, here I have them both at about 6 inches away from my mouth across axis. So I'm not talking directly into them. And that helps out a lot. But if you did want to speak into either one or sing into it loudly, you'd use a pop filter. So let's check that out. People, because. And yeah, that cleaned it up completely on the 57. Let's see the P170. People, because. And yeah, that takes care of it there as well. So again, if you want to use either of these microphones for a vocal application where you're going to have loud plosives like wind coming through, you're going to want to use a pop filter with this. Now let's take a look at the handling noise on each of these microphones. And again, neither one of these is really meant to be a handheld microphone, although, I mean, you could, but it's not really designed for that in either case. But let's start out on the 57 again. And yeah, definitely as I tapped on the boom arm, we were getting that coming through. Let's do that on the 170 now. And yeah, it's definitely coming through again there as well. I started out just with regular mic clips here, kind of the standard application. I'll go ahead and throw a shock mount on each one and we'll test it out. But again, I wouldn't expect the performance in terms of handling noise to be great with either of these microphones. Now I've gone ahead and thrown two identical shock mounts on each of these, so let's check them out again. We'll start with the 57. And to my monitoring, that reduces it somewhat. But again, neither of these microphones is meant to be moved around a lot without noise happening. I wouldn't put them on the end of a handheld boom pole or anything like that. Let's go over to the P170. And yeah, that's definitely picking it up that way as well. So I don't really think either of these microphones has much of an edge in terms of handling noise because that's just really not the application that they should be used for. And let's go ahead and test for background noise rejection here. We'll use keyboard typing just to do this. So we'll start out on the 57, and now I'm typing on a keyboard. Keyboard's about 18 inches away from the microphone, and this is the sound. I'm hearing it through my monitoring. Again, it's pretty difficult to pick it up when you're listening to yourself at the same time, just because you don't have that isolation with your own voice, but hopefully you could hear a little better. Now we'll go over to the P170, and again, I'm typing away, and this is on the P170, and I would expect the P170 to pick up more background noise than the SM57, simply because the P170 is a small diaphragm condenser microphone. But again, hopefully you could hear that a little better than I could while I'm talking. We'll compare the off-axis rejection on both of these microphones as well, because I know many of you are going to want to use this in a situation where you're miking up an instrument and you don't want to have a lot of bleed from the others. So let's start with the 57. So again, right into it. And that's about at 90 degrees from the mic. Here I am at 180 around the back, and again the other 90 degrees. And I mean, it does a reasonable job of rejection, but you know, not perfect like anything. Let's compare to the P170. So now I'm into the P170 directly at it. I'm going to go ahead and turn this here to 90 degrees. So now I'm at 90 degrees to the microphone, and I'll go around the back. Now I'm pretty much at 180 degrees around the back, and turning it over again to 90 degrees in the other direction. And to my monitoring, the 57 did a better job of rejecting the off-axis noise here. Again, when you have a condenser microphone, it's going to be a lot more sensitive regardless of what the polar pattern is. So now that you've had a chance to hear both of these microphones through dialogue as well as guitar and bass amps, what do you think? Do you need both in your mic locker? Could you use one or the other? To me, the 57 has a little bit warmer, darker tone. The P170 has that crisp, clear sound. So again, depends on your purpose. If you're looking for, you know, acoustic guitar, classical guitar, or something like that, I think the P170 is a great choice for that. If on the other hand, you want to have kind of a really mellow jazz guitar through a cabinet or bass guitar, I think the 57 does a really nice job of that as well. Same thing when it goes in terms of dialogue and or vocals. You know, if you have someone who has a very dark voice to begin with, they may benefit from the added clarity the P170 brings. Whereas if you have someone with kind of a very thin voice to start with, the 57 just might help kind of fatten that up and warm it up a little bit. So I think these microphones are both very different. They do get used for some similar applications, but I can certainly see advantages of having both in the mic locker. And I have to say that one of the most interesting things for me about this comparison was looking at the frequency response when recording the guitar and bass amps. Because, you know, the patterns looked really similar to one another. It was more just the density of the sound that was the difference. And, you know, you would expect quite often listening back to a 57 and a P170, there to be more of a difference in that frequency curve. But it is very interesting to see just how that little bit of a thinning out of the frequencies makes such a profound difference in the overall sound and the way recordings with these microphones do sit in the mix. Both the 57 and the P170 are great choices for recording in your studio. And if you're interested in audio gear, studio, recording, streaming, check out one of the other videos on the screen. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.